Once upon a time, in the middle of a cold, snowy winter, there was a queen who sat by her window, watching the snowflakes gently fall. As she gazed out at the peaceful white landscape, she sighed and whispered, "Oh, if only I had a child, with skin as white as snow, lips as red as roses, and hair as dark as night." To the queen's delight, her wish came true a year later. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl who had skin as white as snow, lips as red as roses, and hair as dark as the night sky. The queen loved her precious daughter deeply and named her Snow White. But shortly after Snow White was born, the queen became ill and, sadly, she passed away. The king, heartbroken by the loss of his beloved queen, remarried not long after. His new wife was very beautiful, but she was also vain and cared only about being the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. This new queen owned a magical mirror, and every day she would stand in front of it and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?" And each time, the mirror would reply, "You, my queen, are the most beautiful of all." Hearing this made the queen very happy, and she would smile, knowing she was the fairest in the land. For many years, the mirror always told her the same answer, and she believed no one could ever surpass her beauty. Every day, the queen would stand before her magical mirror and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?" And each time, the mirror would answer, "It is you, Lady Majesty. You are the most beautiful of them all." The queen was always satisfied, for she knew the mirror only spoke the truth. But one day, when she asked the mirror once again, its answer changed. "Queen, you are indeed still very beautiful, but now Snow White is 1,000 times more beautiful than you." Hearing this, the queen's heart filled with jealousy. The mirror had never lied, and now it told her that Snow White, the young girl she had grown to envy, had become more beautiful than her. Furious and consumed with jealousy, the queen decided she could not allow this. She summoned a hunter and gave him a cruel task. "Take Snow White deep into the forest," she commanded, her voice cold. "And there you will kill her. Bring me her heart as proof that she is gone." The hunter led Snow White deep into the forest, as the queen had ordered. But when he raised his bow to point an arrow at her, Snow White, with tears in her eyes, begged, "Please don't hurt me." She was so kind and gentle, and her beauty was so pure that the hunter just couldn't go through with it. He lowered his bow and said, "Run, Snow White, and never come back." Instead of hurting her, the hunter let her go free and, feeling sorry for her, killed a deer and took its heart to the queen as proof, hoping that would be enough to satisfy her. Snow White knew she could not return home, so she ran as far as her legs could carry her, deeper into the forest. After a long time, she came across a little cottage hidden among the trees. Curious and tired, she peeked inside. There, the table was set with 7 small plates and 7 little cups. Snow White, feeling hungry and thirsty, took a small bite from one of the plates and drank from one of the cups. After eating, Snow White felt very tired. She looked around and saw 7 tiny beds lined up neatly in a row. She carefully pushed some of the beds together, laid down, and soon fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. That evening, the 7 dwarfs who lived in the cottage came home from their work in the mountains. The first dwarf looked around and said, "Who's been sitting in my little chair?" The second dwarf noticed the table and asked, "Who's been eating from my plate?" They all looked around in surprise until, finally, they saw Snow White fast asleep on their beds. "Ah, look at her," whispered the dwarfs, all amazed by her beauty. "What a sweet, beautiful girl." "My name is Snow White," she told the dwarfs the next morning. She shared the story of the hunter and how she had run away to escape the queen. The oldest dwarf, with a kind smile, said, "Stay with us. If you take care of the house, we will take good care of you in return." Snow White happily agreed, and from then on, she stayed with the 7 dwarfs. During the day, the dwarfs went to work in the mountains, leaving Snow White alone in the cottage. Before leaving each day, they would remind her to be careful and never open the door to strangers. Snow White promised to be cautious. Meanwhile, Back at the castle, the queen once again stood before her magical mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?" To her surprise and anger, the mirror replied, "Oh, Queen, you are beautiful indeed, but Snow White, over the mountains with the dwarfs, is now 1,000 times more beautiful than you." The queen was furious. Snow White was still alive. Determined to get rid of her, the queen came up with a wicked plan. She disguised herself as an old peasant woman and set off for the dwarf's cottage. When she arrived, she knocked softly on the window. Snow White, remembering the dwarf's warning, hesitated but cautiously opened the window just a little, wondering who this old woman might be. "Hello, dear girl," said the peasant woman with a warm smile. "I have some delicious apples here. Would you like to try one?" Snow White hesitated for a moment and said, "The dwarfs told me not to talk to strangers, but tasting an apple shouldn't hurt." "Thank you, ma'am." She took a bite of the shiny apple, but as soon as she did, she fell to the ground as if she had fallen into a deep sleep. When the dwarfs came home and found Snow White lying still, they were heartbroken. It looked like she was only sleeping, but she wouldn't wake up. Saddened, they carefully placed her in a glass coffin so they could always watch over her. Time passed, and one day, a prince wandered through the forest and came upon the dwarf's cottage. When he saw Snow White, he was immediately enchanted by her beauty. He asked the dwarfs if he could take her with him to his castle, for he wanted to care for her. The dwarfs, touched by his kindness and love for Snow White, agreed. As they carefully moved the glass coffin, something miraculous happened. A piece of the apple stuck in Snow White's throat came loose. She suddenly opened her eyes and sat up. The first thing she saw was the kind, handsome prince standing before her. What happened to the stepmother after that remains a mystery. Some say she vanished, while others believe she turned into a statue. No one knows for sure. But one thing is certain, Snow White never had to worry about her again. Snow White and the prince were soon married, and from that day forward, they lived happily ever after, surrounded by love, kindness, and joy.